meeting to order. Please stand and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call, Mrs. Munson.
Andrew Benson. Here. Doug Day.
Here.
Ron Winlosey.
Here.
Joseph Wetmore. Joseph Wetmore. I didn't see you. Edward Levine.
Here. Okay. That'll take us to item number 4 in your packet. This is the public hearing for proposal local law number 2 of 2. Can everyone hear me okay? Please fast. Public hearing for proposed local law number 2 of 2020, codification of local laws, ordinances, and certain resolutions of the town of Lansing into a municipal code to be designated as the Code of Town of Lansing. And I'd like to open the public hearing. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
Ron. 6:30 something, 6:36.
6:36. Yep.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Brown said aye.
Opposed.
Right. Brown, are you for this or opposed?
4.
Thank you.
Okay, is Joe here yet? Okay.
So I'm getting a text here that Joe does not have a Zoom link.
And the agenda.
It's right on the agenda.
All right, let me send him a message then.
We do have a person waiting in the room, possibly to speak on this matter.
On this one?
Okay.
It might be, I tried messaging them, but they did not respond, so I can simply admit them and see if this is the public hearing they're looking to speak on, if you'd like.
I'm going to do it now. We'll just give a moment here. Send a message to Mr. Wetmore.
And RU2 is working on like this whatever.
So I'll keep texting him as we move forward. So you have somebody, CJ, for
The public hearing.
public hearing?
I believe so. I've tried messaging them a couple times, but they're just there in the room, so I could admit them. Okay, there's Joe. Hold on just a moment.
Okay, I think I'm in.
Good.
It also looks like we are broadcasting live doubly on the YouTube station.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes, we have 2 feeders. We have 2 hosts. We got the town host and we had CJ as the backup because we didn't know if it was being transmitted or not, so we're being overly cautious.
There you go. Ours is working.
You just have,
I'll,
right? I mean, you have the feedback for
Yeah, right. Nope, it's all set.
it. Okay, so back to you, CJ. Does somebody want to You want to bring them in for comments on the first public hearing?
Yes, we will do that. Hold on while we admit this person.
I would tell them I'm sitting in the waiting room, waiting to be admitted.
There you go.
For the first public hearing?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
So that would be heard.
So-
To the board meeting.
Yep, that's gotta be more.
Okay, so CJ is gonna, I think, invite them in now. CJ is the one that's the host tonight. Okay,
Okay, yep, they've been admitted.
all right. Hello? Hello? Sometimes you have to check to make sure you're not muted. Hello?
Eddie, you could go ahead and address the board if you'd like. You're here for a public hearing, is that right?
Done that. Oh, she's saying to that person?
Right.
Sorry.
That's okay. She's invited them in, and we're just waiting for comments.
Oh, he said, I can't seem to get my audio to work, but I am here to observe mostly. So Eddie, we have a YouTube stream that you could watch.
Does the person want to text their question or comment?
Hmm.
Or do they want to call me? You can call me on my cell phone if you want.
I wonder if they can hear you.
No, leave it.
I think again. It's just that there's no response.
Right.
Technology, when it works, it's great.
You're absolutely right.
Okay,
Are you getting some feedback, CJ?
okay, so he said, I will text any comments I have, none for this agenda item. So,
Okay. Do we have anybody else or anybody in the room that wants to make a comment while this public hearing is open for the first item? For the codification law? Anything at your end, CJ?
no additional participants requesting to be admitted to the room.
Anyone in the room? Thought I moved to close the public hearing.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed?
Yes, Doug. Hello? Hi. No worries, buddy. So, Mrs. Munson called for,
To close the public hearing, are you in favor of that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
so now we're looking at the resolution
Yes.
for approving and adopting local law number 2 of 2020 to provide for the codification of the local laws, ordinances, and certain resolutions of the town of Lansing into the code of the town of Lansing.
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
I would like to ask Guy a couple of questions just to clarify, to make sure I'm understanding what we're doing. You there, Guy? So from my reading of it, the changes that were made were, we're switching it over so that all the fees are going to be approved by the town board from time to time rather than being in the code itself. And that you've changed some of the penalties for not following some of the stuff a little bit to probably streamline it with the way things are in other parts of the code. Were there any other substantive changes that I didn't catch? Because I didn't have the code in front of me as I was reading it. I was just reading this part changed, but it didn't really describe what the changes were specifically.
Well, I mean, if you read the illustration of all the changes that were made, it actually delineates every change that was made. In some laws now code, if adopted, the fees as originally applied remain, but they simply are capable of being changed without amending the local law. And that's a structure that the town went to well over a decade ago and is pretty common most everywhere. Yes, most of the remedies and violation provisions were brought up to date so they align with each other, so they're similar. Obviously, violating the stormwater law is probably in some respects a little more problematic than other laws. So the numerical fines aren't always the same, but the structure of the law and how it's built is the same across the board for all. Most of the other changes were formatting, organizational, and there were quite a few language changes because if you know, New York State has been on a multi-year, multi-million-dollar quest to change the name of all its divisions and agencies. So we had local laws that referred to the New York State Gaming Commission, and it's no longer called that, or the New York State Department of Housing and Urban and Community Renewal, and it's no longer called that. So there were a lot of little non-material changes, but there were really very, very few changes that I would consider substantive. The idea here was to do some cleanup, largely in reliance on the professional code people and review from, for instance, I had Patrick and Steve back when it first started review what was going on in parks, and I had different people review different sections, and there was a committee that had a lot of input, and what it was to create a single unified code, and any substantive changes, such as changing the zoning, would occur after this code went in place. That was the plan, and that was followed.
Excellent, thank you.
Sorry about this.
No worries. Any other further discussion from any of the board members? If not, Mr. Munson?
Andrew Benson? Yes. Doug Day?
Yes.
Bronwyn Losey?
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore?
Yes,
Edward Levine?
Yes. Next item is to a motion to open the public hearing for the annual stormwater report.
I'll move that.
Second,
I'll second it.
so Andre seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Opposed?
CJ, do you have anybody that wants to be invited in for public comment for the annual stormwater report?
I do not see anyone waiting in the waiting room.
Okay. Anyone here in the room want to make a comment about the, okay? I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Also,
I got Doug,
Doug,
and Andres seconds it.
all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Now we need a resolution to approve it. Would someone like to move the resolution forward approving the 2020 annual stormwater report? I will. Anyone second it?
I'll second it.
Andres seconds it. Any further discussion? Mrs. Munson?
Andrew Benson? Yes. Doug Day?
Yes.
Ron Woodlowski?
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore?
Yes.
Edward Levine?
Yes. Next item on our packet is public hearing for proposed local law number 3 of 2020 to amend the land use ordinance relating to solar and wind energy systems. Someone like to make a motion to open the public hearing?
I
I
will.
will.
Oh, we're all closing in on that one.
Who was it? John? Joe? Okay.
Sounds like you have a first and a second there.
Well, Joe, you're the first, so I didn't hear who the second one.
Doug.
Doug. Oh, Doug. Can't hear that well, sorry. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I didn't hear it. Bronwyn?
Aye.
Doug?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Opposed? Okay.
Does anybody have any comments they want to make while the public hearing is open?
Somebody did sign up.
I'm going to ask CJ first, then I'll go there. CJ, do you have anybody waiting to be invited in? CJ?
There's no one in the waiting room to be let in
Okay.
as far as I can see.
Anybody? Great, thank you. Does anybody in the room want to make a comment? This is Patrick Higgins.
Yep, on the Drake Road.
Hello, Mr. Higgins.
How you doing? I just had a couple of questions.
Can you just speak into the microphone more, because I'm not sure they won't be able to hear you.
There you go. Yep.
Continue.
I just have a couple of questions. I was wondering, my neighbor put in about 100 feet of solar panels in his front yard. And every day I have to put up a blanket and stuff to keep the reflecting sunlight from halfway burning my house down, kind of that's really bright. You ever been behind a car with the sun hitting the window or something, just imagine 100 feet of that hitting your house. And I was just wondering how and why he ended up with permits to do this. When it's supposedly not supposed to be able to put that in your front yard and stuff.
Well, we had no local law at the time.
Well, okay. I knew there was something.
Now there are setbacks on that. CJ, you want to comment any more on this?
It'll cut out my Lakeview and everything too.
Yes, that's a good question. Not knowing the specifics of the particular project or property in question, I can say that small scale solar energy systems, so those under approximately 10,000 square feet, which are about 25 kilowatts, that are either ground mounted, so on the typical kind of racking system, or are building integrated, may not be installed in required front yards in the future if this local law is to move forward. If this local law passes. I hope that answers at least partially the question.
Unfortunately, it doesn't help you because this law didn't go into effect until after that was put in.
Okay, understand. Thank you for your time. I knew you used a lot of that, I don't know.
Does anybody else have any comments while we still have the public comment period open? If not, does someone want to make a motion to close the public hearing?
Also move.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Someone want to make a motion for resolution making, take that back, take that back. No, that's right, we can do the resolution first, then we have to do the secret, right? Okay. So does someone want to make a resolution adopting local law number 3 of 2020 to amend the land use ordinance relating to solar and wind energy systems?
I'll move it.
Second.
Okay.
I would like,
Go ahead, wait.
I would like it as, oh, we need to vote on this first. I'll talk after that. Oh, no, wait. What I want to have first is CJ talk about how we responded to the county's comments. You know, what kind of changes we had to make versus which ones we just took on advice.
Okay, we can do that right now since part of the discussion.
Yeah.
Steve, you want to chime in?
Sure, and I've also asked Town Attorney Guy Crow to look at these as well. So as you may recall, we discussed some of the preliminary comments back at the March 11th working meeting. And so those have now been formalized as part of this review. And would you like to go through them one at a time, or would you like to discuss them?
Yeah, I'd like to go over all of them.
Okay. Okay, hold on just a moment. Okay, so recommended modification number 1 was related to glare analysis. Glare is typically a piece of environmental quality review that would be included in visual impact. And Guy, feel free to chime in if I'm getting any of this wrong, but glare would be covered as part of both the site planning conditions as well as environmental quality review. So didn't see the need to call that out specifically. But the whole idea is to bring in site planning tools that will help mitigate impacts on surrounding properties, and that includes a host of things, including glare.
Well, yeah, and I would also add that these regulations are supplemental to underlying site plan regulations, and the site plan regulations at section 701.4.6 specifically mention and require accommodating and mitigating glare. So the fact that it wasn't repeated in this law is because it already exists in general site planning for any source or cause, including signage, solar panels, giant parabolic mirrors, whatever.
Okay. That covers that concern. CJ, you want to continue?
Yeah, there was also a requirement that land located under solar panels be vegetated unless they're located under, over an existing parking lot or already paved area. A vegetated cover should be established and maintained underneath solar panels. I think this local law goes to good lengths to give the planning board wide breadth as far as site planning goes to be able to require that. As well as specific plantings, even for pollinators and minimum percentages of the project site as well. So again, I would repeat the comment about the site planning tools being being brought into this
Right.
local law.
And again, to supplement, site landscaping and landscaping plans are common. They're required, including in decommissioning. It's required by ag and markets. And more to the point, even if for some reason we had completely dropped the ball and had no concern about landscaping in our zoning, site plan review, special permitting, or solar law, it's still covered under stormwater law because they'd have to stabilize that ground. So there's multiple prongs into this issue is my point.
Okay. Next one, CJ.
Yeah, so the next comment is to the extent practicable, solar energy facilities should be designed to avoid disturbing more than 10 acres of actively farmed prime agricultural soils. Again, I would refer to the site planning regulations. And let me take a look here. Yes, and so as part of the site planning tools, specifically the new section 802.18.7 actually specifically addresses soils on prime farmland or land of statewide importance. And as I mentioned, there was the requirement to have native vegetation to attract pollinators. This actually allows the planning board to specify freestanding ballast or racking systems in areas they think that would be most beneficial. Also, there should be a topsoil plan for the area for the project itself. And again, we also have strong stormwater controls as part of project review as well.
I'm looking at 802.18.7, and it doesn't in any way discourage prime farmland. It just says you have to save the soil and plant vegetative cover. Why not have something to say we'd like to avoid, at least say avoid prime farmlands there?
And we do, as part of the initial application, ask for those soils to be identified. So.
Right, but are we giving the planning board the tools to say, move it over, we're trying to avoid prime farmlands? As a matter of policy written into the law.
We have not required the solar energy systems sited on prime farmland have to seed up to 20% of the total surface areas. But beyond that, we do not place a hard and fast restriction on prime soils, on disturbance of prime soils.
Right, and I'm wondering whether we can give the planning board some authority to say, move it over, and specifically point and say, prime farm soils are ones where the town, as a policy, wants to avoid putting solar panels on.
Planning should be optional up to the landowner. Number one, and this 20% I think is a reasonable compromise.
I saw Doug's hand up.
No, I was waving to people walking by.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
I don't know that you can resolve this issue since the only places where you connect a large farm does go through areas that have prime farmland. So saying that you can't do anything on prime soils means you're saying you can't really do much in terms of solar panels unless you move it off the actively farmed site and cut down the trees. So, you know, pick your poison. But to me, the bigger problem is the 10-acre standard, because there's also a county policy that has an energy roadmap that says we want 50,000 megawatts by 2030, which is, I forget what the actual measurement is. But basically, if you do the conversion, it says they want 50,000 acres of solar panels in Tompkins County by 2030. So I don't know how you do that 10 acres at a time. Aren't you running the risk if you don't follow what is ag and markets guidelines, which don't have that severe restriction, i.e. they do recognize that allowing this use of the land does preserve the farmland for future use and does sometimes save a family farm because it provides an income stream, just like a cell tower could. But the broader question is, would you want to have somebody just break their application to 3 separate ones, each at 9.9 acres? You know, I understand the issue that you try to encourage them or give them greater density or some kind of bonus to move to non-prime soils. But if you actually dissected ag and markets requirements for prime farmland versus non-prime farmland, for agricultural districts versus non-agricultural districts, they're already incentivized to avoid this. The biggest problem is, in some respects, you can't, because you have to connect to where the power has the capacity to transmit to the grid. And until they upgrade the grid, it is what it is. Any project large enough to, let's be honest, even a small community solar system will be more than 10 acres. The average small system is 12 to 14 acres. So this 10-acre limit doesn't make any sense on some levels, but I understand you pick a number somewhere. So at the end of the day, it comes down to what is the appropriate policy and what is the need of the town of Lansing. The town of Lansing has a comprehensive plan recently amended. I think at one time I did a word count, but the words green, alternative energy, solar, and sustainability appear over like 60 times in the comprehensive plan. You can't have it both ways. You have to try to find a level of compromise. And if you go too far in one direction, then you're going to run into state preemption anyway. That's my comment on this. I understand the issue of avoiding prime farmland, including active farms and including soils of statewide importance, even if they're not prime soils. But my problem with this is the 10 acres, because it doesn't make sense under our comprehensive plan. It doesn't make sense for the farmers that want to achieve income off their land. And it doesn't make sense if you look at the other policies of the county, i.e. their long-term energy roadmap. So to me, the problem isn't the concept that you're talking about, Joe, mitigating the impact. The problem is the 10 acres.
Yeah, but I wasn't saying 10 acres specifically. I was saying, are we giving the planning board the tools to say, you need to move this project over to this part of the property because we're trying to get it off the prime farmlands, or at least some of them.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just getting my comments in as I was supplementing CJ as we go, so that if there was going to be further discussion on this, we wouldn't cycle through a second time. That's all.
So how many parcels have prime, non-prime land? I mean, do you know of any of that? I mean,
I have a map I could share of the prime soils with active agriculture. If that would
you're
be
talking 10 acres, you're talking 2 megawatts approximately.
Yes, and I think that that's an important distinction that's being made in the comments from the county, which is to say, you know, there's a whole page kind of prefacing the comments saying that at the time this document was prepared, the tools for deployment the municipal tools to promote and regulate the deployment of renewable energy systems in Tompkins County. There wasn't a systems, the largest systems they were seeing were around 2 megawatts. So I believe that that was the basis for why they came down with that number, essentially. So, but I think, yes, of course, I think the applicants can work with the planning board. I think we've provided some tools to do that. But we've also tried to emphasize the word practicable throughout the local law. And let me just bring that up to.
So why not have a sentence in there that says where practicable, soils of statewide importance should be avoided, to at least make it clear that we're trying to avoid them?
Why don't you use the word recommend, that you recommend that if possible, prime soils should be avoided.
I'd be happier with that.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that we use that a couple times, the word practicable, and we go so far as to define it. And that's something that I'd like to see carried through the rest of the land use ordinance, which is why we included it here. But practicable is capable of satisfying the overall project purposes after taking into consideration cost, time, technology, and logistics. So it does give the opportunity for the planning board to engage in an iterative process with the applicant. That said, we did really start the local law with section 613 by saying that the applicant, installer, and developer have a responsibility to make sure the solar energy systems are positioned in such a way that they will achieve optimum energy production practicable. So we are asking for the systems to be as efficient as possible, while also balancing the impact on the surrounding environment as well. But if there is specific language that you'd like to add about this, that's great.
It sounds, CJ, like that phrase has covered what we're trying to achieve.
Well, we're trying to achieve two different things. The phrase on 613 is saying that we want to make these as efficient as possible in terms of their production of solar power. And I would like a sentence in, was it 8 something, that says that where practicable, we would like to avoid soils of statewide importance. So that you can point to the applicant and say, that we're trying to avoid it, and this is where it says that we'd like to, but it gives the planning board the ability to say, this project has to be on these soils because of X, Y, and Z of the particular project.
Do you think that the requirement, oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So you're asking to, you are requesting, not requiring, that
Yeah.
it's optional still, but at least they start the conversation, so they have to review it, and at least give it consideration. Is that what you're trying to do, Joe?
I'm trying to give the planning board the ability to look at this site and say, move it over because of the soils, and be able to point in the law and say, this is what we're basing that on.
Well, and once again, they can request that, but if it's not, if it doesn't follow those criteria, go ahead, jump in. Go. So if you, once again, you can, the planning board can ask them that, but they can't demand it.
Well, you know, if I may just jump in for a second, the thing that I was thinking about as part of this, and the way I kind of envisioned this soil section, which, by the way, we did a lot of significant review, including asking Tompkins County Soil and Water and Conservation District to review the local law and provide comments. And we really did emphasize the soil section and tried to get a lot of input on this. But that's why we did include the language, the planning board may specify freestanding ballast or racking systems, thinking that in a very large project, that there may be some areas within that very large project where there may be this, especially farmland of statewide importance, that we'd want to mitigate that impact on, but maybe just in a smaller section. I'm definitely open to the additional language. I just have to take some notes here.
Okay. How does,
Well, Ed, you were modifying my language. How did you modify it?
we are requesting, not requiring, that prime soils be, how do we rephrase this? Prime soils will be considered to be avoided when possible.
Possible or practicable, to use the language that's already been defined.
Yes, at least now it's in the conversation. And I think that's where we want to go with this for the planning board, to say, look, this is what our goal is, when possible, we try to avoid prime soils, but in some cases we can't, because of these certain criteria, they'll have to be on prime soils.
The planning board's job is to take conflicting desires and work the medium between them.
It's almost like going through a site plan review with them.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you're saying it's allowed, but we would like you to consider this, and this. You have 50 acres and you have 100 acres on the lot and 40 are prime soil, or let's say 70 are prime soil and 30 aren't. You want 50 acres. Rather than put all 50 on the prime soil, you put 20 on the prime soil and 30 on the non-prime soil, along those lines. But at least it gives the planning board some parameters as they say, this is what we would like. Can you do it? And this is the reason why. Does that make sense?
Yeah. CJ, do you have language from this discussion yet, or are we still being too vague
I
for
do.
you? Guy does?
Well, I've been trying to figure out how to raise my hand because that option doesn't appear on this screen. But here at the end of 802.18.7, try this on and let me know if it does what you hope it can do. Where practicable, actively farmed prime agricultural soils should be avoided or protected. And in agricultural districts, actively farmed prime agricultural soils and soils of statewide importance shall be avoided or protected.
That works for me.
How's the rest of the board feel about it?
I'm fine with it.
Rowan?
That's pretty close to what I was going to suggest, yeah.
Sandra?
I think it sounds all right. It's a pretty hard decision being a farmer, what you're going to do with your land, especially if it's not profitable. But I do know the land, the closer you get to the lake, the less prime is the land. It's rocky, sloping. And it just seems to me, wouldn't it be nice if there was a whole swath that we could say, that's really crummy farmland. Let's see if we could put that into solar panels.
Well, and you also have, I'm sorry, go ahead. Finish, please.
But it isn't, yeah, it isn't always practical, and the people who own that land, just from my experience, usually want to develop it into houses. But that's where the crummy land is, closer you get to the lake. Closer you get to flat, Cuba County, that's where the good land is.
There's also a degree in here, isn't there 15 degrees? Did I read this in here also, if my memory serves me right? A slope.
Slope, yeah.
15 degrees, more than that, you can't, the closer you get to the lake, especially around here, it's more than 15 degrees.
Was that question about the about slopes?
Correct. As I was reading here.
But also I wonder if the state's going to say, oh, no. Your little town has these laws, but it really doesn't make any difference because we're going to allow up to 500 acres.
Article 23? Yeah.
Article 23 can override anything in this law. We're kind of stuck with that.
I know.
Yeah, so.
I think we should try to pass this law and see what happens.
To CJ's point, at least we have something in writing.
Yeah.
At least we have some guidance. So at least we have at least a conversation, what we hope this would be. But to your point, Andrew, you're absolutely right. If the state comes in and says, you guys sit this one out, have a nice day, then just take it over. There you are.
One of the other questions that you'll have is whether or not this change constitutes a material change as would require yet another public hearing. And I think you have to make that decision, but in thinking through that while you were talking, the answer that I would come up with is no, because this is already required by landscaping plans. It's already required by the decommissioning requirements that involve NICEAG, ag and markets, where you would be in an ag district, you'd have to comply with their requirements in order to even issue an approval. And because I think this issue would have been flagged under seeker. So I don't think we have to go back to step one for a one sentence change that simply puts prime soils on the same level as important wetlands or riparian areas. I don't think it's a material change to the local law. That's my advice, but you guys decide.
That was my next question, guys. Did we reinvent this too much, or I guess not, because I was thinking the same thing. We have to come back to another public hearing.
I don't think so. I think what Joe was saying, not that I want to speak for him, but I think what he was saying is this may be reflected in several other places and parts in this local law, i.e. ag requirements, landscaping plans, stormwater, ag and markets compliance. But here's the section on soils. We should also say it explicitly here, so it's very clear to the planning board and they know they have this tool. I really don't see that as a material change. And that's why I tried to clarify. I was making my general comments to get them out of the way and not really disagreeing with what Joe was saying. But you guys are the ones that decide whether this would require another public hearing, but I don't see that it materially changes the 2018 or whatever, how many pages are here. It's simply taking an idea that exists in several other places and plugging it in this one particular section. But it's up to you if you want to have another public hearing. You can if you want.
Personal opinion is they're not restricting anything. You're not putting anything in there that you're going to restrict it. You're simply giving them another, in my opinion, another avenue to think about. So it is, like I said, requested, not required or demanded.
Right. Another solution that's out there that they're having success with, at least in parts of the Midwest, is to raise the soil, to raise the panels higher off the ground so that you can do low-lying crops underneath, potatoes, alfalfas, things that don't grow over 6 feet. You know, the farmer has to have a tractor that can manage it or whatever, but they're actually having success with this in the Midwest by raising these things up like 12 feet off the ground. But, you know, if that's their mitigation measure, then great, so be it. At least now we can say, hey, you've got to keep this in production or protect it or minimize your impact on it.
And that is part of why we went to the 18-foot
Right,
height limit
right.
as well.
No, I know. And then the applicant can always get a variance and try to go to 24 if it means they can keep, you know, some important crop in place like soybeans or something.
Could you reread the wording change again, Guy? When you're not on mute.
Thank you.
No problem.
The proposal for the amendment is at the end of the section, and it reads, where practicable, comma, actively farmed prime agricultural soils should be avoided, comma, and in agricultural districts, actively farmed prime agricultural soils and soils of statewide importance shall be actively avoided or protected.
I hear us talking about the idea of farming under the panels. Would it make sense to add there something about avoided or impact mitigated, or something that says like still farmed, even if you're to provide a little more leeway there, or does that get too fuzzy?
Don't know. I understand the concept. My bigger concern here is that if someone wants to convert a field to solar panels and it's actively farmed, then they're just going to stop farming it and then apply after they've ripped all the crops out or harvested and take it out of the ag district. And I think that's more of a lose-lose than some of these issues, but that's really a policy decision for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
CJ, for example, instead of just pollinator species support, you could mention crops there as well.
Okay. Yeah, there's.
Go ahead, CJ.
I was going to say, you know, a lot of the conversations we've been having over the last, you know, call it 6 to 9 months have been about agrivoltaics. This idea that you can have this joint a cooperation essentially between crops and solar, but that word or coinage, shall we say, didn't even exist when this local law started being drafted. So it's a bit hard to keep up with, shall we say, the shifting landscape of this. But if you would like to add the additional language to the soil section the guy just mentioned, that would be fine too.
I would like to, yes. And I don't think that it's going to require a separate public hearing. I think this discussion's been going on both through the county and through the rest of the law, that it's not some surprise thing.
Sounds like, Brown, are you okay with this? Sounds like everybody else was too. Are you okay with the verbiage?
Yeah, I am.
I suspect this is not the last time the SOAR law gets tweaked.
Yep.
As technology evolves, amongst other things. So having said that, with said changes,
Well, it's one change, right? Or are you making two changes?
so I said with said changes, with the change, excuse the change, with the said change, sorry, singular. No, I got the look from you, sorry. Are there any other comments or questions or discussion before we move forward with the seeker review?
We still have the rest of the comments from the county. There's just a few more.
Oh, of course, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no worries. So then there's a comment to say unique natural areas as identified by the Tompkins County Environmental Management Council. And for solar energy facilities under 802.18.1, Section 5, we do request identification of potential areas of environmental sensitivity, which include a host of things, including unique natural areas, as well as distinctive views on the scenic resources, et cetera.
And again, obviously seeker would trigger that, but recognizing and protecting UNAs is specifically already in our site plan review requirements at section 701.5.2. So I just think this wasn't read in conjunction with the land use ordinance when the recommendations were made, or maybe they stated it just in an abundance of precaution. Couldn't tell you.
Any comments, or shall we keep going? Okay, keep going, CJ.
Okay, but let's see. This is a shift to the wind energy section. And so the comment says that the proposed law regulates wind energy proposals where the system would sell its generated power. It is silent on wind systems designed for on-site use. The proposed law would thus in effect ban wind systems designed for on-site use. I'm not sure how they came to that conclusion, but under non-tower wind energy systems, there are certainly allowed, and I can go to that section here.
So it would not be allowed in on-site use, is what you're.
So non-tower based wind energy conversion systems are allowed by zoning permit. And those could be used for on-site generation. It's only just the very large wind energy conversion systems, which we don't anticipate too many of, given the dearth, shall we say, of wind speeds that would facilitate the installation of a project of that magnitude. But these smaller non-tower systems are permitted by a zoning permit, which means that they just have to satisfy the criteria, speak with the code enforcement officer, and then they can receive a building permit. So hopefully I have that right. So they suggest either developing a detailed regulatory scheme for on-site wind energy proposals, or amending the proposed local law to allow on-site wind energy systems in the same zoning districts where wind energy source is currently permitted, and they include a table of that, as well as suggestions about definitions.
Okay, anything else?
And just to further clarify, the non-tower based wind energy conversion systems are not based on being located on a very large tower. So they could be hold on just a second. Let me go to this section.
I'm having a hard time visualizing these short towers. Maybe in certain areas of the country, it's quite prevalent. Maybe if you're on a steep slope next to the ocean where the grass are, perhaps, I don't know. Well, I don't see them around here.
Yeah, and just so you know, the three current principal non-tower uses of wind turbines are wind trees, horizontal turbines. In other words, they lay flat on your roof, a lot like your roof vent, and candy canes, what the so-called candy canes. They're the spirals that catch the wind and spin. I'm sure there's new ones that have been developed since then, but those are the main three I'm aware of.
And they're all under 30 feet tall. That's correct.
Right. I mean, I guess somebody could try to build a wind tree over 18 feet tall, but that would meet the zoning permit requirements. They have a height restriction. I think the idea that the planning board was making sure that you didn't end up with 300 to 500 foot towers in residential districts type of scenario. But that was my comment. That those are the types of non-tower based wind applications
Should we move on?
that exist.
Anything else, CJ?
No.
Oh, there you go. Anything else, CJ? Yeah, we have a little dead spot there. There you go. You faded out for a minute. I think you're back now. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. That is the end of the formal recommendations.
Okay. So
There's also additional comments at the bottom, but they're just further comments, not recommended modifications.
Okay. So having said that, with that one change, if everybody's comfortable, shall we move on to the seeker?
I'm good.
I would just like to.
Okay.
I would just like to say one more thing. Oh, sorry. There's one typo in the table, and it is in relation to the topic we just discussed, which is the non-tower based wind energy conversion systems. Instead of 702.15, that should read 702.14. It's a copy editing error from reformatting.
Where are you on, CJ? You're on the law itself?
Yes, so on the table of land uses, 4B, which is non-tower based wind energy conversion systems.
That's on page 5.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm on page 5 now. Which one are you on now?
So that's 4B, that whole row across of all of the different zones. Yep, so that says 702.15, but it should say 702.14.
14?
Yes.
On each, across the whole entire row.
Exactly, yes, thank you very much.
So we're basically changing the 5 to a 4 on all those. That's it, right?
Yeah, it's just referencing the correct section now.
Perfect. Thank you.
As per Guy's earlier comments, I don't think that's a substantive change that requires another public hearing.
Okay. Having said that, there's no other discussion or changes. Guy, do you want to walk us through the seeker? I think we have a part 1 and part 2, if I'm not mistaken.
Just part 2.
I'm sorry?
Well, with due respect, I can defer to CJ because she prepared it, or I can do it if CJ, if you prefer.
Yeah, we can.
I'm sorry. No, if CJ's comfortable, we'll have her walk us through it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so you should have received the part 1 sometime back, I think, in the declaration of lead agency when we first started the environmental review. And yeah, of course, Guy can chime in, of course. So part 2, that will just be the series of 11 questions. We've marked these as no or small impact may occur. And do you concur with those determinations? And remember, the action actually that we have proposed here is actually the clarification of the existing uses that are allowed. So the uses that we're talking about are already allowed. We are just putting them into discrete categories and bringing in site planning controls, which is why this was an unlisted action. So it's not necessarily talking about projects themselves or the impact of these uses more broadly, but getting down into the exact site planning tools and the specificity of the action of specifying the uses, which you can read, and we can just move on to the part 3. There's 2 paragraphs there for you to read.
I'm fine with part 2 as filled out.
I am as well.
Rowan?
Yeah,
Andrew?
Yeah.
Same here, I'm comfortable. For part 2. Anything else, CJ?
So the part 3 is essentially the determination of significance, of which this would be a negative declaration of environmental significance, assuming that you concur with the part 3. There might be something I'm missing to add to the part 3. I would defer to Guy on this language, but essentially we declared lead agency back in June. We sent a notice of intent to what we anticipated could be involved agencies for their comments. We looked at the existing land use regulations as we are simply just updating the existing 3 use classifications into 6 separate discrete uses. And then we reference the parts of the comprehensive plan that supports these changes. And the whole idea, of course, being to mitigate the environmental impacts of projects of the whole host of sizes and scales. So that's what the part 3 says in a nutshell.
I have a quick question. We sent notice to DEC and Ag and Markets. Did they respond in any way?
The Ag and Markets, or was it DEC? I'll look, did respond to the initial declaration of lead agency last year, but it did not receive any response from any of the agencies, which is not really that unusual.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm fine with part 3 as it's filled out.
Doug?
I'm fine with part 3.
Rowan?
me too, yeah.
Andrea?
Yeah.
Same here. Okay. So that concludes the seeker. So now, is there any more discussion?
So we're voting seeker and the amended law as one vote?
We can, or we can separate them.
I'm fine either way. I just want to know what I'm voting on.
We never voted separate.
Yeah, we
No.
have.
Let's do all at once then. Keep going. Goodbye. we are. We've had our motion, we had a second, we had a discussion. We had our seeker. Now it's time for the vote.
Andrew Benson,
Yes.
Doug Day,
Yes.
Ron Pelosi,
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes,
Edward Levine.
Yes. Okay. Now, our fourth public hearing.
I'll move it.
Okay.
Right in the tax levy limit.
Okay, I'll second it. Any further discussion? Oh, sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
We're in the public hearing.
Oh, wait. Anybody in the chat room, CJ, that wants to comment on this?
Chat room, that's funny. No people waiting in the waiting room to enter
Thank you.
the
Thank you.
public hearing that I can see.
So much different language for all these
Waiting.
things. Chat room, waiting room, aye.
Yeah,
Right.
I just thought it was funny.
Zoom,
No worries.
whatever.
Ooh, the Zoom room.
Anybody here at, I guess here at our building that wants to comment on this, is we have the open? Okay.
Make a motion to move it, to close it.
I have to
We
wait,
have to wait a minute.
we have to wait a minute. Just a minute, literally.
For those of us on Zoom, how many people are in the room? How many public did we actually get at the meeting?
98-ish.
How many
One.
people can be here? How many people are here? There's one person here.
Well, there was three.
There
There was
was
3.
two left.
Yeah, now we have 1.
Thank you.
More than last time.
So we have a motion to close the public hearing.
Sure.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Now, if we have a motion for the resolution adopting local law number 4, 2020 to override the tax levy limit.
I'll move it.
Let Doug move it, I'll second it.
Okay. Yep, I'm waiting for you. Any further discussions? No, I'm trying to be polite and wait for your signal here.
I appreciate that.
I just want to get more stuff or daggers on my way. Okay. I don't hear any, so if that's the case, Mrs. Munson?
Andrew Benson,
Yes.
Doug Day,
Doug?
Yes.
Ron Mosley,
Yes.
Joe Wetmore,
Yes.
Edward Levine.
Yes. Okay, item 12 is privilege of the floor. There is no sheet here. Is there anyone in our audience out there that wants to exercise the privilege of the floor? No one here in this room. CJ, anybody parked out there waiting to come in?
No participants seen here in the room.
All right, let's move on to, that's the case. Let's move on to 12A, which is optional board member responses. Since there's nothing to say, there's no response. In your packet, as we continue to move forward here, this would be item number 13. Is the Lansing Community Library report, which we have here. Andrea, do you want to share anything else in that regard?
Just to say that whatever Lansing's doing is what the whole county is doing. Exact same schedule. Slowly but surely, they're adding more, but they're waiting permission to release, which they haven't gotten.
I see them out here. They're making the best of a bad situation. I mean, I see Karen Yon out here, and it's like takeout at a restaurant.
It's like takeout at a restaurant. Very good. Yeah. Order it, and we'll give it to you. That's right.
Bird side.
I called about 10 days ago And I think they were getting close to closing. I said, is there any way you can get a book? And I had to tell you, they brought it right over to my desk. It was
Nice.
above and beyond. It was very nice.
And no cost. So it's
If
different
no
from the
cost,
rest.
yeah.
Exactly. Do they, I mean, when the book comes back, do they have a certain period they just isolate it or they wipe it down?
Yes, yes, they have to.
They have a whole procedure,
Yes,
right?
they have the whole
It's a whole protocol.
Yep.
Okay, moving on to item 14, Lansing Youth Service Report. That's also in your packet.
There's a meeting tomorrow night. Zoom, we did not have a June meeting.
Okay.
And I'm happy that there is going to be a summer program. They're calling it Summer Skies Program. And they're going to hold it down at Myers Park with distancing. This will be in person. There's a step forward.
And you'll have under 50 people, right?
No,
Under 50 people. Good.
Way under.
Next on your, thank you. Next on your packet is Tompkins County Legislative Report. Mike Sigler, I believe he got married, so he was not. Well, congratulations to Mike. And
When does that happen?
the 7th of July.
Oh, wow.
Yep. We move on to item 16, Park and Recreation with Pat Terrell. He has a lengthy report. Thank you in person, Owen. As the same with Jenna, they move and they scramble and they get stuff done and they don't complain. They just say, what do we have to do? We get it done. Sounds like Mr. Rafferty's doing well.
Yep, no, that's the only thing I was gonna add. It's nice to have somebody at the park and all. It's been extremely helpful.
I can't hear Owen. Can you get closer to the mic, please?
It's been extremely helpful having somebody at the park full time.
That was that emergency meeting we had, Joe, for
Yep.
Mr. Rafferty.
Yep. No, he's a great guy. He's very knowledgeable. He's gonna help us do good things.
Excellent. The next is the highway superintendent report. Though there's nothing here, if you go down to a variety of different places like Salmon Creek, I was down there the other day, I saw 3 excavators and 2 sites as they were moving stuff. And as CJ would say, this is the 20-year overnight success. I've been trying to do this for a very long time. I'm absolutely delighted they now have an opportunity to do it. And Cricket and his crew are doing a phenomenal job, in my opinion, on that. Just when we thought that the rec department had a lengthy report, we go to our planner, who has even a lengthier report. My goodness gracious. So good job, CJ. You want to comment on anything?
Sure. I will not elaborate too much on it, but I did just want to mention that Linday said that he will be meeting with McPherson, the winning bidders for the front door project, as well as in the glass this coming Tuesday afternoon. And they should have a better answer on when that construction is going to move forward here soon. So it's kind of an add-on, and just also wanted to give a thanks to the board for accepting the Park Foundation grant that came together quite nicely, and very appreciative. Thank you.
And
Not yet, it hasn't been done yet, but tonight,
Well,
hopefully.
So thank you, and especially thank Joe for the Mr. Wheeler grant, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to jump in on that, Joe?
I'm really excited. We're going to get a really nice plaque down in Lauderdale Park, and I want to mention that my wife Karen helped with the writing as well. It's been a real group effort to figure out how to tell a very complicated story in a very short poem.
I understand. I'm sure, is there anything we can do on our, either on our website or someplace where if people want to have a more detailed story, they can link it up to Mr. Wheeler?
Yeah, I can give you some links to the whole biography and such. I'd also like to do a real unveiling of it when it gets done, but that's going to be probably sometime in October, I guess, given the timeline of getting it constructed and such.
Okay. Good. Anything else for you, CJ?
No, unless there's specific questions on the report that were sent around.
No, as always, I always marvel at your 3 boards you have filled up with stuff.
I guess I had to add another one.
Okay. Nothing else. We're going to move on to the engineer's report. Nothing from Mr. Herrick this time. That doesn't mean he's not busy. Just there's no report. Nothing for agenda 20 for the ag committee report from Connie, because all the ladies and gentlemen, as Andrew knows, they're out in the field working, right? And they're all getting thinner as they keep working. Very hard jobs.
They're all very happy to see it rain too.
Oh, absolutely. So it goes to agenda 21, the consent agenda. So do we read the resolutions, Mrs. Munson?
First we did a first and a second.
I like to. Okay, so everyone want to move agenda 21, the consent agenda?
I'll move it.
Second?
I'll
I
second it.
will. Okay.
Who?
Andrew first and Ed second.
Oh,
I would like this to read
and
them.
then you should read the.
Okay, Ron, you want to read the first agenda? A?
Sure. Resolution authorizing the Director of Planning to hire an information aide.
No, that's not the first
Oh,
one.
Yeah, before that.
She's just reading on the.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading from the agenda.
you are.
I'll read the number one. Resolution accepting Jennifer Sandsted's resignation as the Town of Lansing information aide and authorizing the Director of Planning to hire a Town of Lansing information aide.
Okay. Excellent. Andre, you want to do B?
Resolution hiring part-time seasonal employees for parks and recreation for the town of Lansing.
Joe, you want to do C?
Motion authorizing town supervisor to sign agreement for grant number 20-274, total of $31,000 between Park Foundation and the town of Lansing for stormwater management and traffic impact study for town center.
Doug, you want to do D?
Resolution approving audit and budget modifications and the supervisor's report.
I don't think there's any further discussion of this consent agenda. Mrs. Munson, when you're ready.
Okay, so just so you're clear, you're gonna vote on resolution 20-103 to 2105 and motion 20-17. Amber Benson,
Yes.
Doug Day,
Yes.
Bronwyn Losing,
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes,
Edward Levine.
Yes. Bringing us to item 22, resolution authorizing the issuance of a $288,081.23 bond anticipation renewal note. I'd like to put that motion forward. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, further discussion? This is the sewer, actually, this is the Warren Road Sewer District extension. And we look at all these numbers down here, it gives you a history of all the barns that have been renewed over and over again. And if you look at the interest rate, it's 1.1%. If I read that properly, which I believe I have.
too bad you couldn't get one of those negative interest rates.
Yeah.
Someone told me, I'll use it as a segue, if you take out a 25-year bond now, you probably would eventually have a negative, I guess, down the road. That's a discussion maybe for next month, once we get our subcommittee done for the highway department. No further discussion. Mrs. Munson?
Amber Benson,
Yes.
Doug Day,
Yes.
Bronwyn Losing,
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes,
Edward Levine.
Yes. Okay. Does someone want to move resolution, or actually item number 23, resolution approving agreement for the sale of bore of land at end of Forest Acres Drive?
I'll move it.
Is there a second? I'll second it.
Second.
Okay, go ahead, Roman. That's okay. Don't forget, buzz right in there. Don't be bashful. So Brown seconded. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I have some concerns on this one. My understanding is that we are selling a piece of land so that someone can subdivide their piece of property, but we're selling a piece of property that borders two other people, and we haven't, as far as I know, gotten feedback as to whether they are interested in that property, whether they feel that it affects their property negatively to have that stop being frontage on town land and suddenly become frontage on private property. And I think we need to talk to the other property owners who are adjacent to this parcel before we approve this.
Shall we table this then until our next meeting? Give us time to have the town reach out to the adjacent homeowners, landowners.
I would like that.
CJ, is this time sensitive?
If the board wishes to contact the abutters, that's should be of no issue. The applicant essentially is requesting this of the town board, unless I'm mistaken about that. Guy can chime in on this. It's at the board's discretion whether to sell the land or not, so.
Oh, it's our land. I say ours means the town.
Yes,
In all fairness, if I was a homeowner, there's a buffer there, and all of a sudden there's no buffer, to Joe's point, you at least want to be able to be aware of it, and if you want to take action, then you could. I'm comfortable waiting until our next meeting to address this in one shape or another, if there is either someone else that's interested in the land, or if the neighbors are content with having the applicant purchase it. Brown, how do you feel about that?
That seems wise to me, to
Doug?
try and contact them.
Yep, thank you. Doug?
I have no problem with contacting the abutting neighbors.
Okay,
and,
I think it's a good idea.
so I guess we'll just,
I assume they were contacted.
yeah, same here. That's a good point. So I guess we can, shall we table it? That's the proper, I don't think I tabled another resolution before, but we can rescind it, I guess. Do we have to have a vote on that, or we just table it until next
I mean,
meeting?
we should check with guys, yes, but I think you just table it. We haven't done a vote, so it hasn't passed, so I don't think you need to rescind it. I think you just table it.
Guy?
Just say no vote was tabled.
Correct. Yeah, you haven't voted on anything, so there's, I mean, if you want to be technically formal, whoever made the motion can withdraw it, but tabling it's the same thing.
Let's table it then.
and just to confirm, the abutting properties to this area would be 27 Forest Acres Drive and 28 Forest Acres Drive. Beyond just mentioning that the town is considering the sale, is there any other information that you'd like to include in the letter, perhaps soliciting comment or?
Guy, you have any suggestions as far as additional comments moving forward?
No, I mean, I think you let them know that the town is thinking of selling that piece of land. It's basically an old paper road, and see what their reaction is. I mean, maybe one of them will say, "No, I want it," but sort of the irony of this is that the sale or non-sale of this piece of land does not affect whether or not this applicant can subdivide their property.
Okay.
So,
Should we have a certified letter? So make sure that they receive it, or doesn't, or is that overkill, you think?
We can do that.
you can send a certified letter if you want. It certainly demonstrates that it would have arrived. But I think I think they're permanently year-round residences. So it's up to you. I think a regular letter and maybe a follow-up call if you don't get a reply would be the appropriate way to go. But
That's the other option.
by mail if you want.
So we can do the regular letter and a follow-up call, it'll be fine.
It's up to you.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
I guess we'll move on. Okay. Good. Board member reports. Andra?
besides the library and Lansing services, I did talk to Mike Ziegler, who, and I talked to him about what our county sheriff's department is going to do about community policing. And he has a meeting with Eric Osborne tomorrow. So he's going to get back to me. And he thought it was a good idea that we look into what's happening. And also because it's a state mandate, Governor Cuomo has made, that we have to see how we could address community policing better. I also contacted the superintendent of schools, but did not get a reply yet. And a community member of color who said she'd be willing to meet once with a group, but does not want to be on a committee that doesn't go anyplace, doesn't have a purpose. So I guess if Lansing wants to be represented on a committee that the sheriff is going to have, that'd be a good idea. But Mike is going to talk to him first and see what his plans are.
Well, you know, he's been very receptive.
Mm-hmm.
And he is our representative on that. I mean, obviously people can give him feedback and comments and questions.
Well, Mike didn't say he'd be on it. He's going to talk to
What the?
Eric if he wants to have people from different towns.
Okay,
Since it is a county.
okay. Is there anything else?
No.
We talked about the focus group.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay, I mean, but the focus group, they already have the focus group at the school, right?
Well, apparently because of the superintendent being so very busy trying to figure out how to open the schools,
That's
they
understandable.
don't have a focus group meeting right now.
And I did send Haley Ann your email address, so if she wants to communicate with you on this, she can move forward on that. Go from there. Okay, moving on to Brownwood.
Hello. I spoke with CJ about what she's working on. Was one of the things I did. Had a Friends of Salt Point meeting, and can you hear me all right?
Yep, we can.
Just wanted to double check before I got too far. Friends of Salt Point, they did another cleanup day and a mini one, but are concerned about the number of people at Salt Point, both related to the wildlife there and social distancing and such, and kind of trying to brainstorm and figure out what to do so people can enjoy the natural area, but keep it a natural area and keep people healthy at the same time. I also had an IO meeting discussing plans for working to kind of the future of the IO and such. So that's what I've been up to.
Perfect, thank you. Doug?
Well, I was at, we had the planning board working session this past Monday. Basically, two things discussed were our Airbnb rentals and what regulations and such we have, or what laws we have on the books for those. I think the planning board agreed that we've got to come up with something. I know CJ can add to this, Joe can add to this as well. But we talked about that probably for 45 minutes, and then went on to the audit of our some of the codes and whatnot. So interesting meeting, a lot of good input. I don't know how much headway we actually made, but the planning board made. I'm not on the planning board, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Joe?
I sent in my report. Did anyone have any questions on that?
I did not. Okay, anything else?
I'm okay.
Good. A couple things. A lot of moving parts here. We had baseball camp this week, right? They have an interesting system where as you drive in, basically between the community center and the library, and you stop here at the front, still in your car, and that's where either Owen and or Jenna greet you, right, for your camp, and they'll take the money.
Check in.
They'll check in.
Take your name.
Thank you. And then they'll circle around, and then all the applicants, I guess, that want to be in camp, they have a name tag with a barcode on, right? And the head instructor has a thermometer, and everyone stays in the car, and they test them right there. And if they pass, they also test them right on the barcode on their name tag, and they come out. And if they have a fever, they just keep going, right? Has anybody been sent? You know?
Nope, everybody's been clear.
And they do it every day.
They do it every day and they ask for questions of, have you been in contact, out of the state, whatever.
Do it feel good, and the whole, okay.
Yeah, right.
And you have a fever. And the other thing is that we've had trial court here, right? Or pre-court, excuse me, a couple of times, probably 3 times since we last met. Once again, that procedure, we have the constable also scanned. We also have this place, we've had this place sanitized, I think, what, twice?
Like 3 times. 3 times a week, whenever there's a board meeting.
And they just spray it down. This is that new sprayer that we invested in. Also, Grant Wilder has done it for free a couple times, I believe, right? Amongst others. So we're slowly integrating back in, and if we need to take a step back, we can, and if we take a few steps forward, we can. So also with Bolton Point, they were checking on algae blooms, which I think like on the 5th or 6th of July, it was getting a little bit close. I think we were watching it, right? Also at the lifeguards. They have a drone that they send over. They see where all the spots are on this. I think after the last rain, hopefully, it's dissipated a little bit. I haven't been down to the lake recently within the last couple of days. I don't know if the bloom's still there or not, but there's been a lot of runoff. The highway department bids for RFPs. CJ, there's 21 of them?
Yep, that's correct. We received 21 proposals and 21 cost proposals with those as well.
And talking to Municipal Solutions, we've done scenarios for 3 million, 3.5 million, and 4. I can share it with the board with an email. I just got it yesterday. It goes under different scenarios. It goes under 16 years, 21 years, 25 years, 30 years. You see what the debt service is, amongst others. It's 2% or less as far as that goes. And just food for thought. Moving forward with our tax cap. Looks like the tax cap this year is going to be 1.56%. How you calculate that is interesting because in the past we had to override this tax cap because our drainage districts are basically bumped it up 1 year. There's a separate taxing entity that's formed, you got to bump it up for the whole town. So it's an involved calculation. It's not just straightforward at 1.6, but 1.56%, but that's what the tax cap is this year. Assessments are going up, which is good. Hopefully some of that will be new lumber, not just on the backs of existing lumber. We'll find out, or existing homes. We'll see as that goes forward. The budget worksheets will be sent out, I believe, next week. Let's see, have already, I can't remember. But next week, so we start the process of going through. And one of the things to circle back to the tax cap, they'll usually say either whatever the number is or 2%, whichever is less, but no more than 2%. The comptroller felt because a lot of the different municipalities are not spending all their money this year that they've raised because a lot of the services are not being provided. He felt the 1.46 was comfortable. So we'll see where that goes. That's all I have for right now. We can go into the work session. I kind of put a little brief there on town finances unless our clerk wants to make any comments moving forward, or Guy or anybody. If not, we'll move on to the work session.
I did have a question that concerned me. I'm looking at, and I sent this out late this afternoon. I was looking at the ordinance report and it said how much were gotten in fees. And then I looked at the supervisor's report that said how much were gotten in fees. And it's like a $400 difference between the two numbers. And I'm not understanding why those numbers don't match.
Well, having not had time to look at it, hopefully we'll have your answer tomorrow.
Okay.
Anything else? If not, you want to move into town finances? Do you want to talk about that, or shall we move on?
We should move on. I've been trying to meet with Cricket and we haven't been able to set up a date that the two of us can meet yet.
Okay, how the rest of the board members feel? When they want to talk about finances, or they want to move on also?
I think we can move on.
Okay, Rowan?
I'm happy moving on.
Doug?
Move on.
Okay. So briefly, we talk about the board, the ethics board vacancies, which I think is the next topic. For other boards, we've had people fill out applications, I believe, right, for planning board and ZBA. And I think everyone has the local law or the ethics rules and regulations. So I think, to be fair, we should probably publish that there's, and I will resign from the ethics board on that. I told you I would, because to be proactive, being an elected official, and that we should probably post it, make people aware that if people want to apply for the ethics board, then they should.
I think we need to actually change our ethics law because it specifically states that at least one board member of the Board of Ethics shall be an elected official of the town. And I think we should remove that and replace it saying that no town officials can serve on the ethics board.
What I'd like to do, to your point, Joe, is that let's give this a month with emails back and forth, come up with a policy, as we've done with other policies we've changed. And I'll be consistent about that, to have other board members be able to also express that they want things changed moving forward. And we should have a probably thorough discussion about that at our next board meeting. And this is a reminder, and Mrs. Munson will appreciate this, that agenda items are, when is the deadline for those? If you don't want to put agenda items on.
For the next.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have those written down. I thought I would.
Is it a week from now?
Probably 2 weeks from now, because between now and the next week is 5 weeks instead of 4. So I didn't write them down. I thought I would send it out by email to everyone what the dates are. Off the top of my head, I would guess in 2 weeks.
This is the one we had before, which was Wednesday, June 24th was the deadline, which was a week later, I think, from our last meeting.
Right, but there's normally 4 weeks between meetings. There's now 5 weeks.
I'm looking forward to your email.
I will get that right on that.
Perfect.
Another quick, go ahead.
So that's something we can work on, that policy. We do need to go into executive session for a variety of different things, but Joe, if you want to have another comment, or other board members, feel free.
Yeah, another question I have about it is why we actually have an ethics board that rarely meets. And one of the things that the town of Ithaca's ethics board did is it went over all the disclosure statements that we file every year to look them over and actually have somebody look at them, think about them and say, do we think this was filed completely? Do we see any issues here that need to be brought up? And so if we're going to have an ethics board, I think we should charge it with going over our ethics disclosure forms as well. I think that's a good use of the ethics board. And I think it's important that somebody go over those, thinking about are they complete and are there any issues that are brought up as a result of the stuff that's written in them.
Such as conflicts, potential conflicts, maybe?
Potential conflicts, yeah.
It might be a nice way to smooth the path if someone needs to recuse themselves. You always see where the conflict is, as opposed to having it come up. And this is fine. You're going to have an ethics board. I would imagine that's one of the charges they would have, is to review it. Are they comfortable with it? If they're not comfortable with it, do they want to ask other questions? Well, they also have to be careful this doesn't turn into an interrogation. So I think some of these questions will be generic enough that, but they also can give them specific answers. Okay. Anybody else have any other comments or questions before we move into executive session?
Well, I guess I am curious as to what happened with the case that you brought before the Ethics Board.
I would like to move to executive session. Do I have a second?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Shuffle a little paper here. So add executive session.
Turn the button off. Yeah.
Well, I need to know why we're going to executive session.
There's a variety of different things. Guy, you want to do the first one we talked about regarding my situation?
We are still live on YouTube and recording.
Yeah.
No, we haven't moved in executive session.
Okay, sorry.
When that happens, I'm gonna hit the button. We have a variety of different items to talk about. Actually, two that come to mind with me.
Just want to talk, I can put both of them now. Start with-
One could be proposed pending or current litigation.
Okay.
I suspect that would be two for both.
They both be on the same one? Okay. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Okay, buttons off.
Question, who are we bringing into executive session with us other than Guy?
Well, I'd like to speak. So Owen should stay.
Yep, and Pat's online.
And Pat's online?
I'm on.
Okay,
Pat's online.
Okay, hi, Cuz. And that's for the first one. CJ, you can call, well, you have to be the host, don't you?
No, I can actually leave because I've assigned Owen as the co-host. So I
Okay.
could actually just make him the host. I'll do that right now.
Okay,
And then that way I can roll.
okay, thank you for all you do, my
Okay.
friend.
Thank you. Bye. Nice evening.
Yes, we're gonna do a 5-minute break here,
Then come back.
just to clear our heads, shall we say? Yes. Okay. Your eyes, I don't want to get old.
Well, I can take all this. So you have to stay for all this?
Yeah.
You have fun with that, Owen.
Oh, you ready to go?
You know it. So that's on Zoom, is it? Is that what Pat's gonna do? Go on Zoom? We didn't have many visitors tonight, did we? I actually thought for that solar law, that people would either Zoom in or come in. I thought there would be a lot of comments about
So is that just like grandfathered in, or
it. Solar law.
for what he was complaining about?
Yeah.
That's what I figured.
Time to be at. What are you gonna do about it?
Right.
Doesn't talk about Cambridge.
Do you mind if I just get myself?
Absolutely. No,
I think you're. Unless it's about me, then I might hear. Oh, I think a cold beverage is calling mine.
Good thing I double checked. You transferred it to me. No, still.
It was still recording?
Yeah, but I mean,
Is it now?
yeah, no, we're all set.
It was still recording
We have
for,
radio silence now?
like on YouTube? you mean?
It says it's still live on YouTube on my screen.
I got it.
Is it still live on YouTube?
I just took it off.
You just took it off, Joe. Do you still see it there?
It's still showing live on YouTube. The little green safety shield comes and goes, but it still says live on YouTube.
Yep, I'm seeing the same thing on mine.
Interesting.